The silk gown felt like a cage. Lady Catherine stood before the gilt mirror in her family's crumbling manor, watching her mother's maid tighten the corset until her ribs threatened to crack. Beyond the window, she could see him, the Duke of Ashford, dismounting, his black stallion in the courtyard, his reputation arriving before him like a winter storm. He was known throughout England as the Iron Duke, a man who had buried one wife already and needed another to secure his bloodline and vast fortune. "Smile, Catherine," her mother hissed, pinching color into her daughter's pale cheeks. "This is our only chance. If the Duke doesn't choose you, we'll lose everything." But Catherine couldn't smile. Not when she knew what this visit truly meant. Not when she understood that somewhere in this decaying house, her younger sister Eleanor was being hidden away like a shameful secret. Locked in the attic because her club foot made her unsuitable for presentation. The knock came too soon. Catherine's father, Lord Blackwood, swept into the room with the desperation of a drowning man grasping at driftwood. His gambling debts had consumed their fortune, and the Duke's interest in a Blackwood bride was their last hope of avoiding debtor's prison. "He's here," her father announced, his bloodshot eyes meeting hers with barely concealed pleading. "Everything depends on this, Catherine, everything." As they descended the grand staircase, its carpet worn thin, its portraits of ancestors watching with judgmental eyes, Catherine felt the weight of her family's survival pressing down on her shoulders. The Duke of Ashford stood in their receiving room, tall and severe in his black coat, his face as unreadable as carved marble. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 35, with iron-gray streaks at his temples and eyes that seemed to calculate the worth of everything they touched. "Your Grace," her father began, his voice oily with false cheer, "may I present my eldest daughter, Lady Catherine? As you can see, she possesses all the grace and beauty befitting a duchess." The Duke's gaze swept over Catherine with the clinical detachment of a man appraising livestock. She forced herself to stand tall, to smile demurely, to become the perfect porcelain doll her parents had spent months training her to be. But inside, her heart was hammering with something darker than nervousness. It was guilt. "She'll do," the Duke said finally, his voice flat. "The betrothal papers can be drawn up tomorrow." Catherine should have felt relief. Instead, she felt like a traitor. That evening, after her parents had celebrated with their last bottle of decent wine, Catherine slipped up the narrow servants' staircase to the attic. She found Eleanor, where she always did, curled, up in the window seat, with a battered book of poetry, her twisted foot tucked beneath her worn dress. "He chose you, didn't he?" Eleanor said softly, not looking up from her book. Catherine's throat tightened. "Ellie, I'm so sorry." "Don't be." Eleanor finally met her eyes, and Catherine was struck by how much strength lived in her sister's gentle face. At 23, Eleanor was 3 years younger than Catherine, but hardship had given her a wisdom that transcended age. "You'll be safe." "That's all that matters." "Safe?" Catherine's voice cracked. "I'll be trapped in a loveless marriage with a man who looked at me like I was a horse he was considering purchasing. Meanwhile, you'll be stuck here with parents who treat you like an embarrassment?" Eleanor's smile was sad but not bitter. "I know what I am to them, Catherine. I've always known." Catherine crossed the dusty attic and took her sister's hands. "You're worth 10 of me. You're kind and clever and brave, and if there was any justice in this world—" A floorboard creaked behind them. Both sisters froze. Catherine turned slowly to find the Duke of Ashford standing in the attic doorway, his broad shoulders nearly filling the frame. Her blood turned to ice. How had he found them? How long had he been listening? "Your Grace," Catherine stammered, dropping into a curtsy. "I apologize, I was just—" "Who is this?" The Duke's voice cut through her explanation, his eyes fixed on Eleanor. Catherine's mind raced. If she told the truth, if she revealed that her parents had hidden Eleanor away, it would expose their family's shame. But lying seemed impossible under that penetrating gaze. Eleanor saved her the choice. She stood, moving with the careful grace she'd developed to minimize her limp, and curtsied as well as she could. "I am Lady Eleanor Blackwood, Your Grace, Catherine's younger sister." "Why are you in the attic?" The blunt question hung in the air like a blade. Catherine opened her mouth to deflect, to make excuses, but Eleanor spoke first. "Because I am not suitable for presentation, Your Grace. my affliction would be an embarrassment to any noble family. She said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity, and somehow that made it worse. The Duke was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he did something Catherine never expected. He crossed the attic and examined the books scattered around Eleanor's window seat. He picked up a volume of Milton, then another of Dante. "You read Italian?" he asked Eleanor. "And French and Latin, Your Grace. There is little else to occupy my time." "And what do you think of Dante's Inferno?" Catherine watched in astonishment as her sister and the Duke engaged in a discussion of medieval poetry that ranged from theology to translation theory. Eleanor's face came alive in a way Catherine had never seen before, her eyes bright with intellectual passion. The Duke listened intently, occasionally asking probing questions that revealed a sharp mind behind his stern facade. After nearly an hour, the Duke straightened. "Lady Eleanor, would you do me the honor of joining me for breakfast tomorrow? I have some questions about your interpretation of the eighth circle that I'd like to explore further." Eleanor's cheeks flushed. "Your Grace, that is, my parents would not approve." "Then we shall not tell them until after." He turned to Catherine. "With your permission, of course, Lady Catherine." Catherine felt something shift in the room, like the moment before a storm breaks. "Of course, Your Grace." The next morning brought chaos. When Lord Blackwood discovered that the Duke had requested Eleanor's presence at breakfast rather than Catherine's, his rage shook the house. But the Duke was immovable, and no one, not even a desperate lord, could deny a Duke's direct request. Catherine watched from the hallway as Eleanor descended the main staircase for the first time in years, wearing one of Catherine's hastily altered gowns. Her sister moved slowly, her limp more pronounced under the stress, but she held her head high. The breakfast lasted 3 hours. Catherine waited in agonized suspense, imagining her parents' fury, the family's ruin, Eleanor's heartbreak when the Duke inevitably rejected her too. But when the Duke emerged from the dining room, he requested an immediate audience with Lord Blackwood. "My lord," the Duke said, his voice carrying through the open study door where Catherine lingered, "I wish to amend our arrangement. I would like to request Lady Eleanor's hand in marriage instead." The silence that followed was deafening. "Eleanor?" Her father's voice was strangled. "But Your Grace, she is—" "That is her condition. Her condition is irrelevant to me. In one breakfast conversation, Lady Eleanor has demonstrated more intelligence, grace, and genuine character than I've encountered in 10 years of courting London's finest ladies. She is extraordinary, and I would be honored if she would consent to become my Duchess." Catherine pressed her hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "But what of Catherine?" her mother interjected desperately. "We had an arrangement. Lady Catherine will receive a generous dowry from me, enough to attract any number of suitable husbands. Men, I might add, who will appreciate her own considerable virtues." The Duke's tone made it clear the discussion was over. "Now shall we draw up the new contracts?" 3 months later, Catherine stood in the grand cathedral as her sister married the Duke of Ashford. Eleanor looked radiant in ivory silk, her limp barely noticeable as she leaned on her husband's arm, not for support, Catherine realized, but in genuine affection. As the newlyweds passed down the aisle, the Duke paused beside Catherine. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what, Your Grace?" "For loving your sister enough to let her be seen." He glanced at Eleanor, and Catherine saw something in his eyes she'd never expected, genuine tenderness. "I spent 20 years married to a woman chosen for her beauty and breeding. She was miserable, and so was I. I won't make that mistake twice." Catherine watched them leave, her heart full of a joy she couldn't have imagined when this began. Her parents had wanted her to marry a duke, to sacrifice herself for the family's salvation. Instead, something far more precious had happened. 2 people who had both been judged by the world's cruelest standards had found each other and recognized something true beneath the surface. 6 months later, Catherine married a kind botanist who loved her sharp wit and had no title to burden them with society's expectations. On her wedding day, Eleanor and the Duke traveled from their estate to attend, and Catherine saw that her sister had bloomed like a flower finally given sunlight. "Are you happy?" Catherine asked Eleanor during the reception. Her sister's smile was radiant. He reads poetry to me every night. He's commissioned a special saddle so I can ride despite my foot. He tells everyone who visits that I'm the cleverest woman in England. Eleanor took Catherine's hands. He sees me, Catherine. Really sees me. He chose well, then, Catherine said softly. He chose the best of us. No, Eleanor replied, her eyes bright with tears. He chose differently. That's what made all the difference. Their father had told the Duke to take the pretty one, the perfect one, the daughter who fit society's narrow mold. But the Duke had looked deeper and found something far more valuable, a woman of substance, intelligence, and quiet strength. In rejecting what was expected, he'd discovered what was real, and in the end, that choice had saved them all.